I knew my mother-in-law had crossed a line the moment she handed the last beautifully wrapped gift to my nephew Tyler, and completely ignored my 8-year-old daughter Sophia sitting right beside him on the carpet. The living room of Margaret's sprawling Victorian house in Willowbrook was buzzing with excitement as wrapping paper crinkled and children squealed with delight. The massive Christmas tree towered in the corner, its branches heavy with expensive ornaments that caught the light from the crystal chandelier above. Everything was picture-perfect, exactly the way Margaret Ashworth liked it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But something was terribly, devastatingly wrong. I watched from my spot on the velvet couch as Margaret, my husband David's mother, distributed gift after gift to her 7 grandchildren. Each present was meticulously wrapped in coordinating paper, elegant gold and burgundy with satin ribbons that probably cost more than most people spend on entire gifts. She moved around the room like a queen holding court, her silver hair perfectly styled, her emerald green dress immaculate despite the chaos of Christmas morning. "Here you go, sweetie," she cooed to my sister-in-law Jennifer's daughter, Emma, placing a large box in her lap. Emma, who was only 6, tore into it eagerly, revealing an expensive American Girl doll complete with accessories and outfits. The child's shriek of joy echoed through the room as Margaret beamed with satisfaction. Next came Tyler, Jennifer's 10-year-old son, who received a top-of-the-line gaming console that I knew cost at least $500. His eyes went wide as he examined the box, immediately calling his friends over to see his incredible haul. Margaret's face glowed with pride as she watched his reaction. One by one, she moved through the room. David's brother Michael's twins, Chloe and Connor, each received designer clothes and expensive electronics. His youngest 4-year-old Mason got a massive collection of high-end building blocks and toys that would have been my entire Christmas budget for Sophia. And through it all, my daughter sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, wearing the red velvet dress I'd saved for months to buy her, watching with bright, hopeful eyes as each of her cousins received their treasures. She clapped politely when Emma showed off her doll. She smiled genuinely when Tyler whooped about his gaming system. She waited patiently, exactly as I'd taught her to do, for her turn to come, but it never did. Margaret moved past Sophia as if she were invisible. Not once, but twice, then 3 times. Each time, Sophia's smile dimmed just a little, but she never stopped hoping. Never stopped believing that maybe Grandma Margaret had saved something special for her, something wonderful, that would make this Christmas morning as magical as it was supposed to be. I felt my chest tighten as I realized what was happening. The pit in my stomach grew heavier with each passing minute. I glanced at my husband David, who was engrossed in his phone, completely oblivious to the cruel scene unfolding right in front of him. His brothers, Michael and Robert, were busy taking photos of their children with their new gifts, their wives chatting about holiday plans and shopping victories. None of them noticed that one little girl had been completely, deliberately forgotten. The room filled with the sounds of happiness, children laughing, adults congratulating Margaret on her generosity, the rustle of gift bags being explored. The scent of cinnamon rolls wafted from the kitchen where Margaret's housekeeper was preparing the traditional Christmas brunch. Everything should have been perfect. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But I was watching my daughter's face, and I could see the exact moment when hope began to fade. It was subtle at first, just a slight slump in her shoulders, a quieter clap for her cousin's excitement. She looked around the room, probably wondering if maybe there was one more gift somewhere, one more surprise that would include her in this magical morning. Margaret finished distributing the presents and stepped back to admire the scene. Her arms crossed with satisfaction. She surveyed her domain, the beautiful room, the happy grandchildren, the abundance she'd created. Her gaze swept right over Sophia as if she weren't even there. "Well," Margaret announced with a theatrical sigh, "I think that's everything. What a wonderful Christmas morning this has been." The words hit me like a physical blow. That's everything. The finality of it, the casual dismissal, the complete erasure of my child from this family moment. I felt my face burn with a mixture of humiliation and rage that threatened to choke me. My hands clenched into fists in my lap as I struggled to process what had just happened. 7 grandchildren. 7 beautiful, beloved grandchildren had received lavish gifts from their doting grandmother, all except one, all except my Sophia, who sat there in her pretty red dress with empty hands and a heart that was probably breaking, though she was too polite, too well raised to show it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Sophia and march out of that house, immediately. I wanted to confront Margaret right there, in front of everyone, and demand an explanation for this cruelty. But something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the desire not to make a scene in front of all the children. Or maybe it was the terrible realization that this wasn't an oversight or a mistake. This was intentional. And then, in that moment of crushing disappointment and burning anger, something extraordinary happened. My 8-year-old daughter stood up from the carpet, smoothed down her velvet dress, and did something that would change everything. Something that would leave Margaret Ashworth, the woman who thought she held all the power in that room, completely and utterly speechless. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This wasn't the first time Margaret had made her feelings about my daughter crystal clear, but it was definitely going to be the last. To understand what happened that Christmas morning in Willowbrook, you need to know the history between Margaret Ashworth and me, a history that had been building for 8 long, painful years. It started the day I married her son David. Margaret had made no secret of the fact that she thought David was settling when he chose me. I wasn't from old money like the Ashworth family. I didn't have a trust fund or a pedigree that stretched back generations in their exclusive social circles. I was Sarah Mitchell from Riverside Heights, a middle-class neighborhood where people worked regular jobs and saved up for vacations instead of owning vacation homes. When David and I announced our engagement, Margaret's response was ice-cold politeness wrapped in passive-aggressive comments. "How interesting," she'd said when David told her about my job as a pediatric nurse. "I suppose someone has to do those kinds of jobs." When we showed her the modest engagement ring David had chosen, a simple solitaire that meant the world to me because he'd saved for months to buy it, she'd examined it through her reading glasses and remarked, "Well, it's certainly practical." But it wasn't until Sophia was born that Margaret's disdain truly crystallized into something darker. My beautiful baby girl came into this world with a cleft lip, a completely treatable condition that would require a few surgeries but wouldn't affect her health or intelligence in any way. The doctors assured us that with modern medical techniques, she'd grow up perfectly normal and healthy. Margaret's reaction was devastating. "What did you do wrong during your pregnancy?" she'd asked me while I was still recovering from childbirth. When I tried to explain that cleft lips were random genetic occurrences that happened to perfectly healthy babies, she'd waved me off dismissively. There must have been something. Poor David. This isn't what he signed up for. As Sophia grew, Margaret's treatment of her became more and more obvious. At family gatherings, she'd fawn over Jennifer's children. Beautiful Emma with her perfectly symmetrical features, athletic Tyler with his confident smile. She'd coo over Michael's twins, praising their intelligence and charm. But when it came to Sophia, there were always excuses. "She's so quiet," Margaret would say, as if my daughter's thoughtful, observant nature was somehow a character flaw. "She doesn't really fit in with the other children, does she?" This about a little girl who was gentle and kind, who shared her toys without being asked, who always said please and thank you, who had never caused a moment of trouble in her entire life. After Sophia's first surgery at age 3, when her lip had been beautifully repaired and she looked absolutely radiant, I thought maybe things would change. Maybe Margaret would finally see past whatever superficial concerns had been clouding her judgment. Instead, she found new ways to exclude my daughter. Birthday parties for the other grandchildren were elaborate affairs: pony rides, clowns, expensive entertainment, guest lists that included half of Willowbrook's elite families. Sophia's invitations to these parties were always lost in the mail or delivered so late that we'd already made other plans. When I'd call to ask about them, Margaret would act surprised. "Oh, did I forget to invite Sophia? How silly of me." Well, there probably wouldn't be room anyway. The Christmas gifts had been subtle at first. While the other children received carefully chosen, expensive presents that showed thought and attention, Sophia would get generic items that felt like afterthoughts. A basic coloring book when the others got art sets, a small stuffed animal when they got elaborate toys. But this year, Margaret had gone too far. This year, she hadn't even bothered to hide her cruelty behind the pretense of inclusion. What made it worse was how my husband David handled it, or rather, how he didn't handle it. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say whenever I brought up Margaret's behavior. "She doesn't mean anything by it. She's from a different generation." He'd been so conditioned to avoid conflict with his mother that he'd become blind to how deeply she was hurting his own daughter. But Sophia wasn't blind to it. My sensitive, intelligent little girl had spent her entire life being treated as less than by the woman who was supposed to love her unconditionally. She'd learned to lower her expectations, to hope for less, to accept crumbs of affection as if they were feasts, and that broke my heart more than anything Margaret could have done to me directly. As I sat in that living room watching my daughter's face that Christmas morning, I realized I'd failed her. I'd spent 8 years trying to keep the peace. Trying to protect David from having to choose between his mother and his family. Trying to teach Sophia that sometimes adults make mistakes and we have to forgive them. But there comes a moment when keeping the peace becomes complicity in cruelty. Margaret Ashworth thought she held all the power in that room. She thought her money, her status, her position as the family matriarch made her untouchable. She thought she could exclude my daughter, hurt my child, and face no consequences because everyone was too polite, too afraid of confrontation, too invested in maintaining family harmony to call her out. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The weeks leading up to that Christmas morning had been filled with so much hope and anticipation that the cruel reality felt like a physical blow. Sophia had been planning for months, her excitement building with each passing day as December approached. She'd been talking about Christmas at Grandma Margaret's house since Halloween, her eyes lighting up whenever she imagined finally being included in the family's grand celebration. "Mommy, do you think Grandma Margaret will like the picture I'm making for her?" she'd asked me one evening in late November, hunched over her little desk in her bedroom, carefully coloring with the precision that only an 8-year-old could possess. She'd been working on a detailed drawing of Margaret's house, complete with the elaborate Christmas decorations she remembered from previous years. The wreaths on every window, the garland wrapped around the front porch columns, the massive tree visible through the bay window. I'd watched her tiny fingers grip the colored pencils, selecting just the right shade of green for the shutters, the perfect red for the front door. She'd spent hours on that drawing, adding little details that showed just how carefully she observed everything about her grandmother's world. There were tiny birds perched on the roof, smoke curling from the chimney, even the ornate doorbell that Margaret was so proud of. "She's going to love it, sweetheart," I'd told her, my heart already aching because I knew the truth. Margaret wouldn't see the love and effort Sophia had poured into that drawing. She'd see it as another reminder that my daughter didn't fit into her world of expensive gifts and manufactured perfection. But Sophia didn't know that. In her innocent 8-year-old mind, This was going to be the Christmas that changed everything. This was going to be the year that Grandma Margaret finally saw how special she was, how much love she had to give, how desperately she wanted to be part of the family. She'd been making lists, too. Not wish lists for herself, but lists of things she wanted to do with her cousins. "I hope Emma wants to play dolls with me," she'd written in her careful handwriting. "Maybe Tyler will teach me how to use his new video games. I can help Chloe and Connor build towers with their blocks." She'd planned activities for Mason, the youngest cousin, knowing that as one of the older kids, she could be a good helper and friend to him. The night before Christmas, she'd carefully wrapped her handmade gifts for everyone. She'd used her allowance, money to buy simple wrapping paper, not the expensive coordinated paper that Margaret preferred, but cheerful Christmas designs from the dollar store that she'd chosen herself. She'd made a gift for each cousin, hand-drawn bookmarks with their names written in colorful letters, small friendship bracelets she'd learned to make from a library book, and tiny origami animals that had taken her weeks to perfect. For Margaret, she'd not only finished the drawing of the house, but had also made a bookmark with "World's Best Grandma," written in glittery letters, along with a small clay ornament she'd crafted in her art class at school. She'd painted it carefully, a tiny angel with golden wings and a sweet smile, and she'd been so proud when her teacher had helped her write, "For Grandma Margaret loves Sophia," on the back in permanent marker. "Do you think she'll put it on her tree?" Sophia had asked me as we drove to Margaret's house that morning, the carefully wrapped gifts on her lap. She'd worn her best dress, the red velvet one with the white collar that made her look like a little angel herself. I'd braided her hair with ribbon to match, and she'd chosen her nicest shoes, the black patent leather ones that she usually saved for church and special occasions. "I think it's beautiful, baby," I'd said, which wasn't really an answer but was all I could manage without lying to her. I'd been dreading this morning for weeks, knowing in my gut that Margaret was planning something cruel, but hoping against hope that maybe, this one time, she'd surprise me. Maybe she'd remember that Sophia was her grandchild too, that she deserved love and inclusion just like the others. During the car ride, Sophia had chattered excitedly about everything she hoped would happen. "I wonder if Emma will like the bookmark I made her. Do you think Tyler knows how to make friendship bracelets? Maybe Grandma Margaret will let me help her set the table for Christmas dinner like she lets the other kids do." Each hopeful comment was like a knife to my heart because I could see the disappointment coming from miles away. But I couldn't bring myself to dampen her excitement, couldn't find the words to prepare her for what I suspected was coming without destroying her faith. In family, in love, in the basic goodness of people who were supposed to care about her. When we'd arrived at Margaret's house, Sophia had practically bounced out of the car, her arms full of carefully wrapped gifts. She'd looked up at the imposing Victorian mansion with its perfect holiday decorations and sighed with happiness. "It looks just like my drawing," she'd whispered, and I'd had to swallow hard to keep from crying right there on the front steps. Inside, she'd greeted everyone with such genuine warmth and excitement. "Hi, Grandma Margaret! Merry Christmas!" she'd called out, rushing to give her grandmother a hug. Margaret had accepted the embrace stiffly, patting Sophia's back in a perfunctory way, before quickly stepping away to fuss with some imaginary problem with the decorations. But Sophia hadn't noticed the coldness. She'd been too busy admiring the tree, exclaiming over the beautiful presents underneath it, greeting her cousins with the kind of pure joy that only children possess. She'd distributed her handmade gifts to her cousins immediately, not waiting for any official gift-giving ceremony, just wanting to share her love and excitement with everyone. Emma had smiled politely at her bookmark and set it aside. Tyler had mumbled a quick thanks for his friendship bracelet before turning back to his phone. The twins had barely looked at their origami animals. Only little Mason had shown genuine interest, clutching his tiny paper crane and making it fly around the room while Sophia giggled with delight. But even those lukewarm reactions hadn't dimmed Sophia's spirits. She'd settled onto the carpet with her gift for Margaret clutched in her hands, watching with bright, anticipatory eyes as the official gift-giving began. She'd clapped for every present opened, genuinely happy for her cousin's joy, waiting patiently for her own moment to shine. And as I'd watched her sitting there, so full of hope and love and trust, I'd felt something dark and angry building in my chest. This innocent child, my beautiful daughter, was about to have her heart broken by the one person who should have protected it. And there was nothing I could do to stop it without ruining Christmas morning for everyone else. The moment Margaret announced, "I think that's everything," the atmosphere in the room shifted so dramatically that I could almost feel it pressing down on my chest. What had been a warm, joyful Christmas morning suddenly turned cold and sharp, like stepping from a cozy house into a winter storm. Sophia's smile didn't fade immediately. It took a few seconds for Margaret's words to fully register, for the reality to sink in that there truly was nothing left under that magnificent tree for her. I watched my daughter's face as understanding dawned. It was like watching someone wake up from a beautiful dream only to realize they were in the middle of a nightmare. Her bright eyes, which had been sparkling with anticipation just moments before, grew wide with confusion. She looked around the room, scanning the faces of her cousins who were all absorbed in their new treasures, then back at the tree, then at Margaret, as if surely there had been some mistake. "Grandma Margaret?" Sophia's voice was small, uncertain. She stood up from her spot on the carpet, still holding the carefully wrapped gifts she'd made for her grandmother. "I brought something for you." Margaret barely glanced in her direction. She was busy admiring Tyler's reaction to his gaming console, her face beaming with satisfaction as he whooped and called his friends to brag about his expensive gift. "That's nice, dear," she said dismissively, not even looking at what Sophia was holding out to her. The casual cruelty of that moment hit me like a physical blow. Margaret couldn't even be bothered to look at my daughter's offering. Couldn't spare 5 seconds of attention for the child who had spent weeks creating something special just for her. The handmade gifts that Sophia had poured her heart into were being treated like an inconvenience, an interruption to Margaret's enjoyment of her perfectly orchestrated Christmas morning. But Sophia persisted, the way children do when they don't. Yet understand that some adults are simply incapable of love. "I made you a drawing of your house," she said, stepping closer to Margaret. "And an ornament for your tree. I made it myself in art class." Jennifer looked up from where she was helping Emma arrange her new doll's outfits. "How sweet," she said, in that tone adults use when they're patronizing children, the one that sounds like praise but feels like dismissal. "You're such a little artist, aren't you?" Michael barely acknowledged Sophia's presence, too busy taking photos of his twins with their expensive gifts to post on social media. His wife Linda was already calculating how much Margaret must have spent on each child, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of knowing her children had been deemed worthy of the most expensive presents. And David, my own husband, was scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to the devastation unfolding. Right in front of him. When I tried to catch his eye, to get him to see what was happening to his daughter, he just smiled absently and went back to whatever was so important on his screen. The isolation was complete. In a room full of family, Sophia stood alone with her heart breaking, and no one seemed to notice or care except me. "Grandma Margaret," Sophia tried again, her voice getting smaller with each attempt. "Would you like to see—" "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Margaret snapped, finally turning to face my daughter with an expression of pure annoyance. "Can't you see we're busy? Stop interrupting and go sit down." The words hit Sophia like a slap. I saw her flinch, actually take a physical step backward as if she'd been struck. Her small hands clutched the gifts tighter, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But my brave little girl straightened her shoulders and tried one more time. "I just wanted to give you your Christmas present," she whispered. Margaret's laugh was sharp and cold. "A Christmas present? From you?" She looked Sophia up and down with obvious disdain. What could you possibly have that I would want? The cruelty of that statement sucked all the air out of the room. Even Jennifer and Michael looked uncomfortable, though neither of them said anything. The cousins kept playing with their gifts, but their chatter had died down, replaced by an awkward tension that even they could feel. But Margaret wasn't finished. She was on a roll now, 8 years of pent-up disdain finally finding its voice. You need to learn, little girl, that not everyone gets everything they want. Some people have to earn their place in this family, and frankly, I don't see what you've done to deserve anything special. The words were like acid, designed to burn and scar. I felt my face flush with rage, my hands clenching into fists as every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to protect my child. But I was frozen, shocked by the naked cruelty of what I was witnessing. Margaret, I started, finding my voice at last. Don't you Margaret me, she snapped, whirling to face me with eyes blazing. This is my house, my Christmas, my family, and some people, she looked pointedly at Sophia, need to understand their place in it. The mask was finally off. After 8 years of passive-aggressive comments and subtle exclusions, Margaret was showing her true face, and it was uglier than I had ever imagined. Sophia stood there absorbing every venomous word, her small body trembling, but her chin raised with a dignity that put every adult in that room to shame. She didn't cry, didn't throw a tantrum, didn't beg or plead for the love she deserved. She just stood there, holding her handmade gifts, and took every cruel word like the brave little soldier she'd learned to be. You see, Margaret continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction now that she had an audience for her cruelty. This is what happens when people don't teach their children proper expectations. Some children are born into families that matter, that have something to offer, and others. She shrugged, letting the implication hang in the air like poison. The room was dead silent now. Even the younger children had stopped playing, sensing the tension and cruelty radiating from their grandmother. Emma clutched her new doll closer, looking confused and frightened. Tyler had put down his gaming console and was staring at Margaret with something that looked almost like horror. And through it all, David continued scrolling through his phone, either completely oblivious to what was happening or choosing to ignore it because confronting his mother would require more courage than he possessed. Margaret smiled, the satisfied smile of someone who had just delivered what she considered a necessary lesson. Now, she said, smoothing down her emerald dress, I think it's time for brunch. Everyone except… She paused, her gaze settling on Sophia with obvious disgust. Well, everyone who matters, come to the dining room. That was the moment. That was when I knew that 8 years of trying to keep the peace, 8 years of making excuses, 8 years of hoping Margaret would change, had all been wasted. My daughter, my beautiful, kind, generous daughter, had just been told in front of the entire family that she didn't matter, that she wasn't worthy of love, that she would never be good enough to earn her place in the Ashworth family. And as I sat there, paralyzed by rage and heartbreak, watching my 8-year-old child absorb the cruelest rejection imaginable, I realized that something fundamental had just broken. Not just Sophia's heart, though that was shattered beyond repair, but something in me too. Something that had been holding me back, keeping me silent, making me complicit in this abuse. Margaret Ashworth thought she had won. She thought she had finally put us in our place, finally made it clear that we would never be welcome in her world. She had no idea that she had just awakened something in my daughter that would change everything. What happened next defied every expectation I had about how my 8-year-old daughter would react to such devastating cruelty. I braced myself for tears, for the heartbroken sobs that any normal child would release after being so publicly humiliated and rejected. I prepared to scoop her up in my arms and carry her out of that toxic house, away from Margaret's poison and the family's complicity. But Sophia didn't cry. Instead, she did something that made my heart skip a beat and sent a chill of anticipation through the suddenly quiet room. She carefully, deliberately, placed Margaret's wrapped gifts on the coffee table beside her, arranging them with the same precision she'd used when wrapping them. Then she looked up at her grandmother with eyes that seemed far too old and wise for her 8-year-old face. "Thank you for being honest with me, Grandma Margaret," she said, her voice clear and steady, without a trace of the tears I'd expected. "I've been wondering for a long time why you treat me differently. And now I understand." Margaret's confident smirk faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd been expecting either. She'd clearly anticipated tears, begging, or a tantrum that would prove her point about my daughter being unworthy of the Ashworth family's refined standards. Sophia continued, her small hands clasped in front of her like she was giving a presentation at school. "I used to think maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to make you love me. I thought if I was extra good, extra quiet, extra helpful, maybe you'd see that I could be a good granddaughter too." The room had gone completely silent. Even the youngest children seemed to sense that something significant was happening, their earlier excitement about their gifts forgotten as they watched this tiny girl face down the family matriarch with remarkable composure. "But you've helped me understand something very important today," Sophia went on, and I could hear something in her voice that I'd never heard before. Not anger, not hurt, but a kind of clarity that was both heartbreaking and powerful. "You've shown me that your love comes with conditions. And that's okay. Because now I know I don't have to keep trying to earn something that was never going to be given freely." Margaret's face was turning an alarming shade of red. "How dare you?" she started. But Sophia held up her small hand, in a gesture that was so adult, so dignified, that even Margaret fell silent. "I'm not finished," Sophia said politely but firmly. "I have something I'd like to say to everyone here." She turned away from Margaret and addressed the entire room, her gaze moving from her father, who had finally looked up from his phone with the expression of dawning awareness, to her aunts and uncles who were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, to her cousins who were watching with wide, curious eyes. "I want to thank all of you for teaching me something very valuable today," she said, her voice carrying in the silent room with startling authority. "You've shown me what conditional love looks like, and you've helped me understand how lucky I am to have a mom who loves me no matter what." Jennifer's mouth fell open. Michael looked like he'd been slapped. Even Linda, who rarely showed any emotion stronger than mild disapproval, looked genuinely shocked. But Sophia wasn't done. She reached into the small purse I'd bought her to match her Christmas dress, a purse she'd insisted on bringing because it made her feel grown up, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something last night because I wanted to be prepared in case this Christmas didn't go the way I hoped it would," she said, unfolding the paper with careful precision. "Mom always tells me it's important to have a plan, so I made one." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What had my daughter been planning? What had she seen coming that I'd missed? "This is a letter I wrote to myself," Sophia announced, holding the paper with both hands. It says, "Dear Sophia, if Grandma Margaret doesn't give you a Christmas present today, remember that it doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. It just means she doesn't know how to see the good things about you. And that's her loss, not yours." The words hit the room like a physical force. I saw Jennifer actually gasp. Michael's wife Linda put her hand over her mouth. Even the children seemed to understand that something profound was happening, that their little cousin was somehow teaching the adults a lesson they desperately needed to learn. Sophia refolded the letter and put it back in her purse. "I also wrote down all the people who do love me just the way I am," she continued. "My mom, who works extra hours so I can take art classes. My teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who hung my drawings on the classroom wall. My friend Katie from school, who always saves me a seat at lunch. My pediatrician, Dr. Chen, who says I'm brave when I get shots. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who lets me help in her garden and tells me I have gentle hands with flowers." Each name was like a small rebellion against Margaret's cruelty, a quiet assertion that love existed in abundance in Sophia's world, just not in this house, not from these people. So I realized something important, Sophia said, her eyes moving. Back to Margaret, who was now gripping the arm of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. I don't need your presence, Grandma Margaret. I don't need your approval. And I don't need to keep hoping that someday you'll decide I'm good enough, because I already know I am. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely that it was almost visible. Margaret, who had been so confident in her cruelty just minutes before, now looked small and mean in her elegant chair. My daughter, who had been dismissed and rejected, now commanded the attention, and I could see the growing respect of everyone present. I have presents for all of you, Sophia continued, gesturing to the gifts she'd made. Because that's who I am. I'm someone who gives love even when it's not returned. But I'm also someone who knows her own worth now, thanks to you. She picked up her handmade gifts from the coffee table and began distributing them, not with the eager hopefulness she'd shown earlier, but with the calm dignity of someone performing a duty. She handed Emma her bookmark, Tyler his friendship bracelet, the twins, their origami animals. Each cousin accepted their gift with a solemnity that hadn't been present before, as if they suddenly understood the value of what they were receiving. Finally, she approached Margaret with the drawing and the clay ornament. These are still for you, she said, placing them on Margaret's lap despite the older woman's obvious discomfort. Not because you deserve them, but because I made them with love, and I don't take back love once I've given it. Margaret stared, down at the gifts as if they were foreign objects she'd never seen before. The drawing of her house, so carefully detailed and lovingly created, seemed to mock her now. The little clay angel ornament with its sweet face and golden wings represented everything she had rejected, everything she had been too blind to see. But this is the last time, Sophia said quietly, her words falling into the silence like stones into still water. This is the last time I'll hope for something from you that you can't give. This is the last time I'll make excuses for why you don't love me. And this is the last time I'll let anyone make me feel small for being exactly who I am. She stepped back from Margaret's chair and straightened her red velvet dress, smoothing down the skirt with the same careful attention she'd given to wrapping her gifts. Then she turned to me with a smile that was both heartbreaking and triumphant. I'm ready to go home now, Mom, she said. I think we've celebrated enough Christmas here. But Sophia wasn't quite finished. As I stood up to gather our coats, ready to leave that house of cruelty behind forever, my daughter did something that would haunt Margaret Ashworth for the rest of her life. She reached into her purse one more time and pulled out another folded piece of paper. This one different from the letter she'd written to herself. Actually, Grandma Margaret, she said, her voice still steady and clear. There's one more thing I need to give you before we go. Margaret looked up from the handmade gifts on her lap, her face a mixture of confusion and barely contained fury. She clearly wanted this humiliation to end, wanted us gone so she could regain control of her perfect Christmas morning. But something in Sophia's tone made everyone in the room lean forward, sensing that whatever was coming would be significant. I wrote this for you last week, Sophia said, holding out the paper to her grandmother. After I heard you talking to Aunt Jennifer on the phone about how disappointed you were that we were coming to Christmas dinner. A chill ran through the room. Jennifer's face went pale as she realized their private conversation had been overheard. Margaret's eyes narrowed dangerously, but she made no move to take the paper from Sophia's outstretched hand. I didn't mean for you to hear that, Sophia continued matter-of-factly. I was just getting a glass of water from the kitchen when you said that having us here would lower the tone of your Christmas celebration. You said you wished Dad would finally understand that some people just don't belong in certain circles. The silence in the room was deafening. David's phone had finally been forgotten as he stared at his daughter, perhaps beginning to understand for the first time the depth of his mother's cruelty. Michael and Linda exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly remembering conversations they'd participated in or overheard. At first, I was really sad, Sophia admitted, her voice still calm but now carrying a weight that made everyone hang on her words. I went to my room and cried for a while, but then I started thinking about what you said, and I realized something important. She unfolded the paper and began to read, her young voice carrying clearly through the ornate living room. Dear Grandma, Margaret, I heard what you said about me and Mom not belonging in your world. And you know what? You're absolutely right. We don't belong in a world where love has to be earned through money or status or looking a certain way. We don't belong in a world where children are treated differently based on things they can't control. We don't belong in a world where family members are ranked like trophies instead of treasured like gifts. Margaret's face had gone from red to ashen. She was staring at her 8-year-old granddaughter as if seeing a complete stranger, which, in many ways, she was. She had never bothered to know the real Sophia, the thoughtful, perceptive child who had been quietly observing and understanding far more than any adult had given her credit for. Sophia continued reading, "But I want you to know that I forgive you for not knowing how to love me. I think maybe nobody ever taught you that love isn't supposed to hurt people or make them feel small. I think maybe you learned that love was something you had to earn, and now you don't know how to give it freely." The psychological insight from an 8-year-old was staggering. Around the room, I could see the adults processing what they were hearing, perhaps recognizing uncomfortable truths about their own relationships with Margaret, their own experiences of conditional love within the Ashworth family dynamics. I also want you to know that I feel sorry for you, Sophia read, her voice never wavering, because you're missing out on knowing me, and I'm actually pretty wonderful. I'm kind to animals, and I share my lunch with kids who forget theirs. I help my mom with groceries even when she doesn't ask. I read to the kindergartners at school because Mrs. Rodriguez says I have a gentle voice. I remember everyone's birthday, and I always say thank you. Each item on Sophia's list was like a small indictment of Margaret's blindness, a catalog of the love and goodness that had been dismissed and rejected. I saw Jennifer wipe away a tear, saw Michael's jaw clench as he perhaps recognized his own complicity in overlooking his niece's wonderful qualities. But most importantly, Sophia continued, I want you to know that your rejection doesn't define me. It defines you. When you choose not to love someone who deserves love, you don't make them less lovable. You make yourself less loving. And that's really sad, because being loving is one of the best things a person can be. The philosophical wisdom coming from my daughter's 8-year-old mouth was stunning. She had somehow distilled the essence of unconditional love, the nature of worthiness, and the true cost of cruelty into terms that even a child could understand, and that adults desperately needed to hear. Margaret was trembling now, whether from anger or shame or shock, I couldn't tell. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed less perfect, her elegant dress less impressive. In the face of her granddaughter's profound grace and wisdom, all of her material trappings looked hollow and meaningless. The last thing I want to tell you, Sophia read, approaching the end of her letter, is that I hope someday you learn how to be happy without making other people sad. I hope you figure out that the best families are the ones where everyone feels safe and loved and important. And I hope that maybe, if you ever want to try again, you'll remember that I'm still your granddaughter, and I still have room in my heart for you. But only if you can find room in yours for me, exactly as I am. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the coffee table next to Margaret's untouched gifts. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, could hear the wind whistling around the corners of the old Victorian house. That's what I wanted to give you for Christmas, Grandma Margaret, Sophia said, her mission finally complete. The truth. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I thought maybe if you understood how your actions affect other people, you might want to choose differently next time. She stepped back and took my hand, her small fingers warm and sure in mine. I'm ready now, Mom. But before we could leave, something extraordinary happened. Emma, Margaret's beloved granddaughter, the one who had received the expensive American Girl doll and all of Margaret's attention, stood up from where she'd been. Sitting with her new toy, Wait, she said, her 6-year-old voice uncertain but determined. She walked over to Sophia, clutching the bookmark that her cousin had made for her. This is really pretty, she said, holding up the handmade gift. Did you really make it just for me? Sophia smiled. The first genuine smile she'd shown since the gift-giving began. Yes, I remembered that you like to read chapter books now. I thought you might want a special bookmark. Emma looked down at the carefully crafted bookmark, then back at Sophia. It's better than anything from the store, she said quietly. Because you made it thinking about me. And with that simple observation from a 6-year-old, the final truth was revealed. Love wasn't about the price tag or the prestige. It was about the thought, the care, the intentionality behind the gesture. It was about seeing someone clearly and choosing to create something just for them. Margaret's expensive store-bought presents suddenly looked exactly like what they were. Generic displays of wealth rather than expressions of love. Sophia's handmade gifts, dismissed and rejected just moments before, now revealed themselves as what they had always been. Pure love made tangible. The revelation was complete. The real gift had been given, received, and understood. And Margaret Ashworth, sitting alone in her elegant chair surrounded by the evidence of her cruelty and blindness, finally understood what she had lost. The transformation in that room was immediate and profound, like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Emma's simple declaration about Sophia's handmade bookmark being better than anything from the store seemed to unlock something in the other children that had been suppressed by years of watching the adults' behavior. Tyler, the 10-year-old, who had barely acknowledged his friendship bracelet earlier, suddenly stood up and walked over to where Sophia was still holding my hand. He held up his wrist, where he had quietly slipped on the colorful braided band she'd made for him. "This is actually really cool," he said, his voice uncertain but growing stronger with each word. "I've never had anything made just for me before. Like, made by someone who was thinking about me while they made it." He looked around the room at all the expensive gifts scattered on the carpet. "All this other stuff. I mean, it's nice and everything, but anybody could have bought it. This is just mine." The twins, Chloe and Connor, scrambled over to examine their origami animals with new interest. "How did you learn to make these?" Chloe asked, holding up her tiny paper crane with something approaching wonder. "Can you teach me?" "I got a book." "From the library," Sophia replied, her face lighting up with the first real joy she'd shown all morning. "It took me weeks to get the folds right, but I wanted each one to be perfect." Even little Mason, who was only 4, seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. He brought his paper frog over to Sophia and made it hop across her palm. "It's magic," he announced with the absolute certainty that only small children possess. "It's the best present ever because it's magic." But the children's awakening to the true value of Sophia's gifts was only the beginning. The adults in the room were having their own reckonings, and it was painful to watch. Jennifer was the first to crack. She had been staring at the bookmark Emma was holding, and suddenly her perfectly composed face crumpled. "Oh, God," she whispered, her hands flying to cover her mouth. "What have we done? What have we been teaching our children?" She looked around the room at the expensive gifts, then at her daughter, who was now sitting close to Sophia, asking detailed questions about how to make bookmarks. "Emma, honey," she said, her voice thick with something that sounded like shame. "Do you remember what I told you in the car about Cousin Sophia?" Emma looked up with innocent confusion. "You said she was different and that we shouldn't expect too much from her." The words, repeated in a child's matter-of-fact tone, sounded even more cruel than they probably had when Jennifer first said, "Them." "I was wrong," Jennifer said, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "I was so wrong. Sophia isn't different in a bad way. She's different in a wonderful way. She's more thoughtful and kind than—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but we all knew what she meant. more thoughtful and kind than the rest of us. Michael was having his own moment of reckoning. He was staring at his phone, where he'd been preparing to post photos of his children with their expensive gifts. Slowly, deliberately, he deleted the post he'd been composing and put the phone away entirely. "Linda," he said to his wife, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk about what we've been teaching the kids about what matters." Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face as she watched her twins peppering Sophia with questions about origami and art and all the creative things they'd never been encouraged to explore because they weren't prestigious enough, weren't expensive enough, weren't impressive enough to post on social media. But it was David's reaction that broke my heart and filled me with hope at the same time. My husband, who had been so conflict-averse, so determined to keep the peace at any cost, finally looked up from his phone and really saw what was happening. He saw his daughter surrounded by cousins who were finally seeing her true worth. He saw his brothers and sister-in-law grappling with their own shame. And finally, he saw his mother. Margaret was still sitting in her chair, but she looked nothing like the imperious matriarch who had started this morning. She was staring at the handmade gifts on her lap, the detailed drawing of her house, the little clay angel ornament, as if she'd never seen them before. Her hands were shaking as she traced the careful lines of Sophia's artwork, taking in details she'd been too blinded by prejudice to notice earlier. The drawing wasn't just a picture of her house. It was a love letter rendered in colored pencils. Sophia had included tiny details that showed how carefully she'd observed everything. The way the morning light hit the bay windows, the pattern of the bricks around the front door, the specific shape of the wreath Margaret hung every Christmas. It was the work of a child who had spent hours thinking about her grandmother's world, trying to capture it perfectly as a gift of love. The clay ornament was even more heartbreaking in its simplicity. The little angel's face wore a gentle smile, and when Margaret turned it over, she could see where Sophia had carefully written, "For Grandma Margaret, love Sophia, in permanent," marker that wouldn't fade or wash away. "She made this for me," Margaret whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "She really made this for me." David finally found his voice. "Mom?" he said, and there was a strength in his tone I'd never heard before. "She makes something for you every year, every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day. And every year you find a way to dismiss it or ignore it, or make her feel like it's not good enough." Margaret looked up at her son with eyes that seemed suddenly ancient and lost. I didn't realize." "Yes, you did," David said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and I knew it too, and I let it happen because I was too much of a coward to stand up to you." He walked over to where Sophia was still surrounded by her cousins and knelt down beside her. "Sweetheart, I owe you an apology. I should have protected you from this. I should have made sure you knew every single day how valuable and wonderful you are." Sophia looked at her father with those wise 8-year-old eyes. "It's okay, Daddy. I figured out how valuable I am all by myself. But thank you for finally seeing it too." The simple forgiveness in her words seemed to undo something in David. He pulled her into a fierce hug, and I could see his shoulders shaking with the weight of years of regret and newfound determination. Around the room, the expensive gifts that had seemed so important an hour ago now looked garish and meaningless. The children were trading them back and forth, but their real attention was focused on Sophia's handmade treasures and the stories behind them. They wanted to know about the library book where she'd learned origami, about the art classes where she'd learned to make clay ornaments, about the careful thought that had gone into each personalized gift. Margaret's perfect Christmas morning had been completely transformed. Instead of a showcase of wealth and status, it had become a masterclass in the difference between price and value, between buying affection and earning love, between giving gifts and giving of yourself. But the most profound transformation was in Margaret herself. As she sat there holding the evidence of her granddaughter's love and her own blindness, something seemed to crack inside her carefully constructed world. The expensive decorations, the designer dress, the image of perfection she'd spent so many years maintaining, all of it suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless in the face of an 8-year-old's authentic grace. For the first time in 8 years, Margaret Ashworth was truly seeing her granddaughter, and the person she saw looking back at her wasn't the flawed, unworthy child she'd convinced herself existed. It was a remarkable little girl with a capacity for love and wisdom that put every adult in the room to shame. The question now was whether it was too late to do anything about it. Margaret sat in that chair for what felt like an eternity, staring at Sophia's gifts while the transformed Christmas morning continued around her. The children had moved to the floor in a circle, with Sophia at the center teaching them how to fold paper cranes. Their expensive toys lay forgotten as they struggled with creases and corners, laughing when their attempts looked more like crumpled balls than elegant birds. I was gathering our coats, ready to leave this house and its painful memories behind, when Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quieter room, everyone heard her clearly. "Sophia," she said, and my daughter looked up from where she was guiding Connor's small fingers through a particularly tricky fold. Could you come here for a moment?" The room went silent again. After everything that had happened, after all the cruelty and rejection, what could Margaret possibly have to say now? I stepped closer to my daughter, ready to shield her from any final acts of meanness. But Sophia stood up calmly and walked over to her grandmother's chair. Margaret's hands were trembling as she held up the drawing of her house. "Tell me about this," she said softly. "Tell me how you made it." Sophia tilted her head, studying her grandmother's face with the careful attention she gave to everything important. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she moved closer and pointed to different parts of the drawing. "I sat on the front lawn across the street for 3 different days," she explained matter-of-factly. "I wanted to see how the light changed the colors of the bricks and the shutters. See here?" She pointed to a subtle shading on the front door. "In the morning, the red looks darker because of the shadows from the big oak tree. But in the afternoon, it gets really bright and pretty." Margaret's breath caught. "You sat across the street? For 3 days?" "Mom thought I was just playing outside, but I was really studying your house," Sophia said with the pride of someone sharing a cherished secret. "I wanted it to be perfect because it's your house, and you love it so much. I thought if I could show you how beautiful it really is, maybe you'd see that I pay attention to things you care about." The words hit Margaret like physical blows. Here was evidence of her granddaughter's deep thoughtfulness, her desire to connect, her willingness to spend hours creating something meaningful, all dismissed and rejected because Margaret had been too blinded by her own prejudices to see what was right in front of her. "And this?" Margaret asked, her voice breaking as she held up the clay angel ornament. "That took me 4 tries," Sophia admitted with a small smile. "The first 3 cracked, in the kiln at school, because I didn't smooth the clay properly. Mrs. Rodriguez stayed after school with me to help me get it right. She said the most beautiful things take time and patience." Margaret was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the little angel ornament. "4 tries," she whispered. "You tried 4 times." "I wanted it to be perfect for you," Sophia said simply, "because even though you don't love me the way you love the other grandkids, I still love you. And when you love someone, you want to give them the best you can make." The words broke something fundamental in Margaret. She began to sob. Not the delicate tears of a refined lady, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone confronting the full weight of their failures. She reached out tentatively, and when Sophia didn't pull away, she gathered her granddaughter into her arms for the first real embrace they'd ever shared. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered into Sophia's hair. "I'm so sorry. You're right about everything. About me, about conditional love, about all of it. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo 8 years of being blind and cruel and stupid. Sophia pulled back just enough to look into her grandmother's face. You don't have to fix everything at once, she said, with the wisdom that had been stunning us all morning. You just have to start being different now. Today, right now. And incredibly, Margaret nodded. Will you teach me? Will you show me how to love you the way you deserve to be loved? I've been trying to show you for 8 years, Sophia said gently. The difference is, now you're ready to learn. What happened over the following hours was nothing short of miraculous. Margaret insisted that we stay for Christmas dinner, but this time, she asked Sophia to help her in the kitchen. I watched through the doorway as my daughter stood on a step stool beside her grandmother, both of them carefully arranging vegetables on a platter while Margaret asked question after question about Sophia's art, her school, her friends, her dreams. Chapter 4. Other family members had their own reckonings to face. Jennifer spent an hour looking through Emma's room, quietly removing expensive toys that had been bought to impress rather than to bring joy, making space for art supplies and books. Michael called his office to cancel a conference call he'd planned to take during Christmas dinner, choosing instead to learn origami from his 8-year-old niece. David finally found the courage to have the conversation with his brothers that was 8 years overdue. I heard their voices in the study, David's finally strong and clear as he explained what their silence had cost his daughter, what their complicity in Margaret's cruelty had done to his family. There were arguments, raised voices, and eventually, the sound of grown men crying as they faced their own failures as fathers and uncles. But the most profound change was in the children. Emma asked if she could spend the night at our house sometime so Sophia could teach her more about art. Tyler wanted to know if Sophia could show him how to make friendship bracelets for his teammates. The twins begged to know when they could come visit so they could learn more origami animals. Christmas dinner was unlike any Ashworth family gathering in memory. Instead of stilted conversation about stock portfolios and social events, the table buzzed with talk of books and art projects, and school stories. Margaret hung Sophia's clay angel on the Christmas tree right where everyone could see it, and she propped the drawing of her house on the mantelpiece like a masterpiece. When it was time for us to leave that evening, Margaret walked us to the door. She knelt down to Sophia's level and took her small hands in her weathered ones. I have a lot to make up for, she said seriously. 8 years of mistakes and missed opportunities. I can't promise I'll get everything right immediately, but I can promise that I'll try every single day to be the grandmother you deserved all along. Sophia considered this with her characteristic thoughtfulness. Can we have tea parties? She asked. Just you and me? I've always wanted to have tea parties with my grandmother. Margaret's smile was radiant. Every week, she promised. Every single week for as long as you'll have me. Over the following months, Margaret kept that promise and more. She attended every school art show, cheered at every small achievement, and slowly, carefully, built the relationship with Sophia that should have existed from the beginning. She learned to see past appearances to hearts, to value thoughtfulness, over expense, to understand that the most precious gifts can't be bought in stores. She also used her influence in Willowbrook's social circles to champion inclusion and kindness, becoming an unexpected advocate for children who were different, overlooked or undervalued. The woman who had once excluded her own granddaughter became a voice for the excluded everywhere. The other family members had their own journeys of growth. Jennifer and Michael made genuine efforts to teach their children about compassion and authentic value. David grew a spine and learned to protect his family without apology. But perhaps the most important change was in Sophia herself. She learned that she had a voice, that her wisdom and strength could change hearts and minds, that standing up for herself didn't make her mean or difficult, it made her powerful in the best possible way. Years later, that Christmas morning would be remembered not as the day Margaret was cruel, but as the day everything changed. The day an 8-year-old girl taught a room full of adults what love really looks like. and how courage and grace can transform even the most broken relationships into something beautiful. As I write this story 3 years later, Sophia is 11 now, and she still has tea parties with her grandmother every Saturday afternoon. They sit in Margaret's sunroom, using the good china that was once reserved only for the most important guests, talking about everything and nothing while they work on art projects together. Margaret has learned to embroider, of all things, because Sophia mentioned wanting to try it, and now my daughter's room is filled with pillows and wall hangings that her grandmother has made with her own hands. But this story isn't really about Margaret's redemption. As remarkable as that transformation has been, it's not even about David finding his courage or the cousins learning to value authenticity over expense. This story is about something much more universal, something that happens in families everywhere, every single day. It's about the moment, when we choose to see people for who they really are, instead of who we think they should be. How many times have you dismissed someone's efforts because they didn't meet your expectations? How many times have you overlooked a gesture of love because it didn't come in the package you were expecting? How many times have you made someone feel small because they didn't fit into your idea of what valuable looks like? The truth that Sophia taught us that Christmas morning is this: every single person has something precious to offer the world, but we're so busy looking for the wrong things that we miss the real treasures right in front of us. Think about the handmade gifts in your own life. Not necessarily the literal ones, though those matter too, but the offerings of time, attention, creativity, and love that people give you every day. The friend who remembers your birthday not with an expensive present, but with a heartfelt text message exactly when you need to hear from someone. The child who brings you a dandelion from the yard because they think it's beautiful and they want to share that beauty with you. The elderly neighbor who waves at you every morning, offering the gift of acknowledgement and connection in a world that often feels anonymous and cold. These gifts are easy to dismiss because they don't cost money, because they don't come with impressive packaging, because they don't boost our status or make us look successful to others. But they are the gifts that actually matter, the ones that feed our souls and remind us what it means to be human. Sophia understood this at 8 years old, but it took the rest of us decades to learn. She knew that the value of a gift isn't measured by its price tag, but by the love and intention behind it. She knew that being worthy of love doesn't depend on meeting someone else's arbitrary standards, but on the simple fact of being alive and trying your best to be kind. Most importantly, she knew that when someone treats you poorly, it says everything about them and nothing about you. Their inability to see your worth doesn't diminish your worth. It only reveals their own limitations. But perhaps the most powerful lesson from that Christmas morning is about the courage it takes to stand up for yourself with grace. Sophia didn't respond to Margaret's cruelty with cruelty of her own. She didn't throw a tantrum or lash out in anger. Instead, she responded with a wisdom and dignity that transformed everyone around her. She showed us that you can acknowledge someone's harmful behavior without becoming harmful yourself. You can set boundaries without building walls. You can refuse to accept mistreatment without becoming bitter or defensive. You can choose to forgive without forgetting the lesson. This is perhaps the hardest balance to achieve. Standing up for yourself while maintaining your compassion, protecting your heart while keeping it open, saying no to what you don't deserve while still believing in people's capacity to change. In our social media world, where outrage often feels like the only acceptable response to injustice, Sophia's approach seems almost revolutionary. She didn't try to shame Margaret into changing. She didn't seek revenge or try to hurt her grandmother the way she had been hurt. Instead, she simply held up a mirror and asked Margaret to look at herself. Honestly, that's real power. Not the power to destroy or diminish others, but the power to inspire them to become better versions of themselves. Every day, we have opportunities to be like Sophia. Every day, we encounter people who are dismissing someone's efforts, overlooking someone's worth, or treating others as less than because they don't fit into predetermined categories. And every day, we get to choose how we respond. We can choose to speak up for the person being excluded. We can choose to see the value in the handmade over the store-bought, the heartfelt over the expensive, the authentic over the impressive. We can choose to create spaces where people feel seen and valued for who they are, not what they have, or how they look, or whether they meet our expectations. But most importantly, we can choose to examine our own hearts and ask ourselves the hard questions. Who am I overlooking? Whose efforts am I dismissing? Whose worth am I failing to see because I'm too focused on surface-level differences? The Margaret in this story isn't a villain. She's a cautionary tale. She's all of us when we let prejudice blind us to love, when we let status matter more than character, when we let our own insecurities make us cruel to others. But she's also proof that it's never too late to change, never too late to start, seeing clearly, never too late to choose love over judgment. 3 years later, Margaret tells everyone who will listen about her brilliant, artistic, compassionate granddaughter. She brags about Sophia's kindness the way she once bragged about expensive gifts. She's learned that having a granddaughter who makes art is infinitely more impressive than having one who simply receives expensive presents. But more than that, she's learned what Sophia knew all along: that love isn't something you earn through performance or perfection. It's something you give and receive simply because you're alive and worthy of connection. If this story resonates with you, I challenge you to look around your own life for the Sophias, the people whose worth you might be overlooking, whose gifts you might be dismissing, whose love you might be taking for granted because it doesn't come in the form you expected. And if you've ever been the Sophia in someone else's story, if you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or made to feel less than, remember that their inability to see your worth says nothing about your actual value. You are enough, exactly as you are. And anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing someone remarkable. The most beautiful gifts are often the ones that can't be bought, wrapped, or posted on social media. They're the gifts of time, attention, creativity, and unconditional love. And the people who offer these gifts, people like Sophia, are the ones who make this world worth living in. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. 6 months ago, I received a phone call that brought everything full circle in the most beautiful way imaginable. It was from Mrs. Rodriguez, Sophia's former elementary school art teacher, now working at Willowbrook Middle School where my daughter had just started 6th grade. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I need to tell you about something extraordinary that happened in my classroom today." She went on to explain that there was a new student, a boy named Marcus, who had just moved to Willowbrook with his single father. Marcus had a severe stutter, and the other kids had been making fun of him during lunch, mimicking his speech and laughing when he tried to participate in class discussions. He'd started eating alone, avoiding eye contact, shrinking into himself, the way children do when they feel like they don't belong. But then, Mrs. Rodriguez continued, Sophia did something that reminded me why she's always been one of my favorite students. Instead of joining in with the other kids or simply ignoring the situation, Sophia had walked over to Marcus during lunch and sat down beside him. She didn't make a big show of it or call attention to what she was doing. She simply started eating her sandwich and began talking to him about art, asking if he liked to draw, sharing stories about her favorite art projects. When Marcus tried to respond and began stuttering, Sophia didn't rush him or look away uncomfortably like the other kids did. She waited patiently, maintaining eye contact, nodding encouragingly, treating his words as valuable regardless of how long they took to come out. "I've been teaching for 23 years, Mrs. Rodriguez told me, and I've never seen a child handle social exclusion with such natural grace and wisdom. But what happened next was even more remarkable. Over the following weeks, Sophia had quietly worked to integrate Marcus into her friend group. She'd invite him to sit with them at lunch, include him in group projects, and most importantly, She'd taught the other kids by example how to interact with someone who communicated differently than they did. But the moment that had prompted Mrs. Rodriguez's phone call happened during a class presentation. Marcus had been assigned to give a report on his favorite book, and everyone could see how terrified he was. His stuttering became more pronounced when he was nervous, and several kids were already smirking in anticipation of the entertainment they expected. Marcus began his presentation, his voice shaking as he struggled through the first few sentences. Some students started to giggle, and I could picture my daughter's face hardening with the same quiet determination I'd seen that Christmas morning 3 years ago. Sophia stood up, Mrs. Rodriguez said, and she said, "Excuse me, but I'd like everyone to know that Marcus has read more books this semester than anyone else in our class. He's been sharing the most amazing stories with me, and I think we should all listen carefully because he has really important things to say." The giggling stopped immediately. Sophia sat back down, gave Marcus an encouraging nod, and waited. The rest of the class, following her lead, settled in to actually listen. Marcus completed his presentation with confidence growing in his voice with each sentence. When he finished, Sophia started the applause, and the entire class joined in. Not the mocking applause that kids sometimes give to be cruel, but genuine appreciation for his thoughts and insights about the book. After class, Mrs. Rodriguez continued, I asked Sophia why she'd stood up for Marcus that way. Do you know what she said? I had a feeling I knew, but I let her tell me. She said, "My grandmother taught me that when you see someone being treated unfairly, you have two choices. You can be part of the problem by staying silent, or you can be part of the solution by speaking up. And my mom taught me that everyone deserves to be heard, especially when they have something important to say." I felt tears prick my eyes, not just because I was proud of my daughter, but because of the beautiful irony of what she'd said. Margaret, the same Margaret who had once dismissed and excluded her own granddaughter, had indeed taught Sophia something valuable. Not through her initial cruelty, but through her transformation afterward. Through her years of making amends, Margaret had shown Sophia what it looked like to recognize your mistakes and choose to be better. Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't finished with her story. The most amazing part is what happened at the end of the semester. Marcus gave a speech at our class celebration, completely voluntarily without any assignment or requirement. He wanted to thank Sophia publicly for being his friend when he needed one most. She told me that Marcus had stood up in front of the entire class, and with only minimal stuttering because he'd grown so much more confident, said, "Sophia taught me that the way people treat you says more about them than it does about you. She taught me that I don't have to shrink myself to make other people comfortable. And most importantly, she taught me that real friends don't just accept you despite your differences, they celebrate you because of them." The parallels to that Christmas morning were impossible to ignore. Once again, Sophia had faced a situation where someone was being excluded and diminished. Once again, she had chosen grace over cruelty, inclusion over indifference. And once again, her response had transformed not just the immediate situation, but the hearts and minds of everyone who witnessed it. But what struck me most was how the lessons from that devastating and ultimately redemptive Christmas morning had become part of who Sophia was. She hadn't just survived Margaret's initial rejection. She had learned from it, grown from it, and was now using that experience to help others who faced similar challenges. When I shared Mrs. Rodriguez's call with Margaret during our weekly family dinner, yes, we now have weekly family dinners where everyone is welcomed and valued, her reaction was everything I could have hoped for. "She's teaching other children what I should have taught her from the beginning," Margaret said, tears in her eyes. "She's breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them. She's becoming the person I wish I had been brave enough to be at her age." Then Margaret did something that perfectly illustrated how completely she had changed. She asked if she could meet Marcus and his father, not to interfere or insert herself into the situation, but to see if there was any way she could support them as they adjusted to life in Willowbrook. 2 weeks later, Margaret had quietly arranged for Marcus to have speech therapy sessions with the best specialist in the area, covered entirely by her. She didn't make a big announcement about it or expect gratitude. She simply saw a need and filled it, the way she'd learned to do in the years since that transformative Christmas morning. The ripple effects continue to spread. Marcus's confidence has soared, and he's become one of the most popular kids in his grade. Not because he stopped stuttering, but because Sophia taught everyone to see past surface differences to the person underneath. Several other kids who had been struggling with their own forms of exclusion have found acceptance in the inclusive environment that Sophia helped create. And perhaps most beautifully, Marcus has started volunteering with younger children who have speech difficulties, passing on the same acceptance and encouragement that Sophia showed him. This is how healing happens, not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the daily choice to see people clearly, to stand up for what's right, and to believe that everyone deserves love and acceptance exactly as they are. Sophia is 14 now, and she still makes handmade gifts for people she cares about. But more importantly, she gives the gift of herself, her attention, her compassion, her unwavering belief in people's fundamental worth to everyone she meets. That Christmas morning 3 years ago wasn't just about one family's reckoning with cruelty and redemption. It was about planting seeds of wisdom and grace that would continue to grow and spread, touching lives we'll never even know about. And sometimes, on quiet Saturday afternoons when I watch Sophia and Margaret having their tea parties, both of them laughing over some shared joke or working together on an art project, I'm reminded of the most important truth that emerged from that painful Christmas morning. Love doesn't just heal the people who give it and receive it. It transforms everyone it touches, creating ripples of kindness that can change the world, one heart at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.